varying levels of success. All right, so you want to find the vulnerabilities in your Windows system. There are various tools out there. Let me see if I can find somewhere to put this thing that isn't too annoying. And as always, it's not really a window, so it doesn't move very well. All right.
Are you still testing?
What's that?
Never mind.
Yeah, there'll be more at the end. Anyway, so there are a lot of vulnerability scanners are pretty bad. There was a test about 4 years ago from a guy that got the 10 most popular vulnerability scanners and ran them against exactly what they were designed to find, and none of them found more than half of what they're supposed to find. The one designed for SQL injection only finds half the SQL injections and so on, because it's essentially a black art. I mean, they go to something like an input field, and they have maybe 100 test cases, like different patterns of punctuation marks, and they send those up to the server, and they look for certain patterns in the response to indicate a vulnerability, and they often get confused and think there's a vulnerability when there isn't one, or they don't detect a vulnerability because the response isn't exactly in the pattern they're looking for. They're pretty primitive things, vulnerability scanners. The Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer is not a general vulnerability scanner like that. All this does is use Microsoft Windows API calls to ask the server what version of a user they're running. Do you have this patch? Do you have that patch? So it does not try to deduce a vulnerability by sending some kind of attack. It just goes down a checklist like a compliance officer. Do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? So it is efficient at doing what it does. All it does is make sure that you are obeying Microsoft's 1,000 recommendations for security. What did you say? Yeah?
Well, why don't the other vulnerability scanners do that?
Well, because because one thing, they're not tied to just limited to just Microsoft products. That's probably the main thing. And so you have this product if you have Microsoft products, but most people have many products, and now there is no clear list. Like when people I know that run Linux servers, every 2 months or so, they will look at the updates and they will choose to only update a few things. All the things they're not using or the updates that are dangerous, they don't put them on. So nobody actually knows what patches you should have on a Linux server. They're not one size fits all. It's more difficult than that. So the other ones try the other approach. They try to detect a vulnerability by its responses. But they do use the CVE list like this, and they try to test for each problem in the CVE list. The problem is none of those tests are perfect. And that's the way it is. I mean, you can, one big thing is, even if you're using a vulnerable version of something, you might have another layer that mitigates it, like a intrusion detection system on the network, which blocks that attack on the way in. So if I ask your server what version you're using, and I say it's vulnerable because it's the wrong version, that might not be true. It might be that the real attack won't work. So that's why the other technique is attempting to do a better job. Anyway, the baseline security analyzer looks like this, like any other Microsoft product. And it just checks all the updates for every Microsoft product, SQL Server, IIS, Internet Explorer, I guess Edge now. It checks to make sure that your Windows operating system is obeying all their recommendations, like not too many administrator accounts, disable the guest account, and so on. It checks IIS to make sure that you're doing what Microsoft recommends in SQL Server and your desktop applications like Internet Explorer security zones. If you're using older versions of Windows, there are older versions of this tool to run. This tool is specific to which version of Windows you're testing. Anyway, so you have to meet some minimum requirements, then you install MBSA, and it can scan the local machine you installed it on, or you can scan your network, but you have to give it a valid administrator password for each machine because it has to log in as administrator to harvest all this information. So then there's hardening. If you just buy something at the store and plug it into your network, you've made your first mistake, because everything is sold with some default settings, and default settings are usually not good enough for secure systems. So they call this process hardening, which is once you buy something, how do you improve it before using it? And that's the step here. So your company should have a policy of what you do. We change the password, we remove this. We install this antivirus suite or whatever. That's how we harden the system before it's considered safe to use. I should mention, by the way, this was a problem with Windows deployment systems. If you buy a laptop these days and you foul up your laptop and you call tech support, they will often tell you, boot it up, press F12, there's an emergency recovery system that will just restore the whole thing back to the way it was when it was fresh. Because they have a ghost image, an image of the whole drive on another drive, and they will just replace it and everything will be like new again. Companies have the same thing now. They have a deployment server, they deploy the operating system over the network, and you can do something like boot up and press F12, and will install a fresh copy of the operating system in its default state on your machine to fix whatever your problem is. The problem has been, you start your company, you make those golden images, then you use them for maybe a year, the machine's put on patches, when somebody restores it, they're getting an image that's 12 months behind on its patches. So they're creating a vulnerable machine before they can update it. So one thing Microsoft now supports, they used to call this slipstreaming, it was only available for service packs, but because of Microsoft's foray into virtualization, you can now put an image in a Hyper-V file, and you can put patches on the image static, so that it stays up to date, so when people deploy from the image, it will be up to date right away, because this is a real problem. You can't have a machine that's deficient on its patches, even for a few seconds on your network, or it's a hole, things to get into. So that's an issue. Anyway, so penetration testers are people who try to break in as a sort of a theatrical stunt, but these days they also are expected to give a list of the vulnerabilities they found and recommendations for them, like a security tester. A security audit is this thing where you just have a long list of make sure they're doing this, make sure they're doing that, make sure they're doing that, and then report all the deficiencies like a financial audit. Like I say, that's what you prepare by getting CISA certification, and there's a lot of jobs in it because it's a lot more technical than an accounting type audit. Anyway, so you got to patch your stuff. This is your number one line of defense. Amateurs trust antivirus. The professionals all know that antivirus does very little good. The only thing that really protects you is patching, because most people can't find vulnerabilities. They just use ones that are known, and once they're known, there's a patch. So if you patch things, then the attacks people have available to them won't work. So you can run Windows Update automatically. Nowadays, Microsoft's latest thing is to force you to put your Windows 10 updates, whether you're on, whether you like them or not, which is somewhat questionable, but it does at least mean people get their updates. Companies do not use update at the end user position because there's two problems there. One is, suppose you have an employee that gets sick, they're out for a month, their machine is not getting turned on, it's not getting updated. The other thing is, if it asks the user, shall I put on the updates, some of them will just say no, so now some machines are not getting updated. A third thing is, as we very well know, Microsoft puts out updates that are bad updates that will harm the machines. They had like 3 of them last year that they were so bad they actually had to recall them and have a patch to the patch. So you can't just deploy an update because Microsoft offers it. You have to send it to your security team who will test the update on a test system, usually virtual, to make sure it doesn't break anything important, and then you deploy it. Another thing is, if you have half the machines that update and half don't, they often won't work together anymore. It can freeze up a network. They all be at the same level. So for all these reasons, you do not update one by one, any more than you do anything else one by one. You do it from a central point of control. And Microsoft has various products available, System Management Server, Windows Software Update Service, and their paid product called MOM, Microsoft Operations Manager, which will handle all your updates. And then you have one place, you test an update until you're happy with it, then you deploy it from the server. Now everybody has to get it. The next time they log in, it will push the update down before they get their desktop. That's how you do it. Anyway, antivirus is considered essential at large companies, although you should not have a false sense of security. It does not mean no one has compromised the machine, but it does mean that a whole lot of automated attacks won't get in. The dumbest attacks will be blocked. Amateurs just install antivirus in each machine. Professional companies have to have monitoring, just like the other aspects of auditing. You have a central panel, and you know whether everybody's using antivirus. And they call that network access control. They have it at some colleges where you can connect to the network. The first thing you have to do is submit a health report to a quarantine server that says, what version of Windows do you have? What patches do you have installed? What antivirus do you have? When was it last updated? And unless you pass that test, they will not let you access the network. They will instead send you to a remediation server, which will offer downloads of those products, saying download and install all this junk before you can get on the network. And that's what you have in more professional environments. Yeah?
What are some of the antiviruses that are used by companies?
Well, the big companies use like McAfee and Norton in America because they have corporate editions. By the way, they have severe security flaws in the antivirus products. McAfee antivirus was caught. Vincent Taviso has spent the last 4 years at Google researching them and exposing their flaws. McAfee Enterprise actually exposed your domain administrator password. It was bloody awesome. But anyway, those are the popular ones in America. The best quality antivirus in the world is usually Kaspersky or Nod32 from ESET, one from Britain and one from Russia. They have the best research. But I don't know if they have the best enterprise deployment management system. McAfee and Norton are the ones that have that. And then there's all the free ones like Avira and Avast and stuff, and those are a lower level protection, no corporate management solution, and they're just for people who are too cheap to pay the $30 for McAfee or Norton. Yeah.
Yeah, I did an internship, Texas worked for Synopsys a few years back.
I've not heard of Synopsys. Is it antivirus?
No, Synopsys is a computer.
Okay, yeah.
I was in tech support.
Yeah.
And then, so we would support all the employees there. They would come in with a computer. So they got a virus, got this. And they were running Norton,
Yeah.
what do you call it, Enterprise.
Norton Enterprise Edition, yeah.
So whenever they had, they would still get it.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that's the main, that's the,
So then
it's absolutely true that you can be running a good antivirus and still get infected. They don't stop everything, yeah.
So they're bringing it to us, and then, so we hit it with Vulnerabilites, which is free.
Yes, now, then we're gonna get there. Malwarebytes anti-malware is real important because it removes, the real problem is not viruses. The real problem is PUPs. I think we're just about, yeah, here we are, right on target. Okay, PUPs, this is the #1 threat that bothers people these days. Although the biggest risk for corporations is probably ransomware, but for home users, it's PUPs. PUPs are things that are not viruses. They do not spread. They are not even exactly illegal. These are things that someone has tricked you into installing under some very thin veneer that they're good for you. Like you try to watch a video and it says to play this video, you have to install this codec. And it has this long terms of service. And if you read that thing, it says you want to have pop-up ads on the screen, change your homepage to Yahoo, install a toolbar that will capture every keystroke and send it to us, participate in surveys, and then after you do it, your browser's all shot and all this garbage is popping up on your screen, but it's not illegal, and the companies will sue you if you put them in the antivirus product. They will say, how dare you block us and call us a virus? We're a legitimate company. People want our product, and they agreed to install it, which is sort of true and sort of not true. CompUSA, I think they're gone now, but they wanted to see this thing where nobody reads the terms of service, so they put it in terms of service they had a product that would scan your computer for problems online. And they put in a terms of service, and on page 10, they put a statement that if you read this far, we will pay you $1,000. And it sat there for 9 months before somebody collected the money. Nobody reads those things, but everybody checks the box. They said this is the biggest lie in the world. There used to be other lies, like the check in the mail. The biggest lie now is, I have read and understood the terms of service. Everybody tells this lie 10 times a day now. Anyway, so that's the problem. These are PUPs that will do garbage like this, put all these toolbars in your browser and stuff. Malwarebytes is the only company that has chosen to block PUPs, which means they have to put up with a ton of lawsuits from these companies, and the big guys like Norton and McAfee won't do it, but Malwarebytes will. So their product will remove PUPs and block PUPs. If you get the pay version, you get real-time protection. And it is not a technical issue, it's a political, legal issue of blocking PUPs. Yeah?
What do you think of Sophos?
Sophos will block them too? Oh, I didn't know that. That's good. They might be able to get away with it because they're not an American company, but I think they still can get sued in America. Yeah?
So after you run the Vulnerabilites, my people would tell me we would run both malware testing apps, Norton and at the same time.
I'm not sure about the same time, but certainly you do want to run them both because Malwarebytes is not antivirus. It's only anti-installed malware like PUPs. So they're different. They're specialized solutions. By the way, one of my students worked at one of these PUP companies. They're in San Francisco. Komodo, I don't know if you've heard of them. Komodo was the nastiest PUP about 2 years ago on Windows. It would infect your machine. It was almost impossible to get off. It would trash your browser homepage. And one of my students worked there, the software company, and they kept asking him to do nastier and nastier things. And finally they said, we want you to write a toolbar that will harvest all the network traffic, crack the HTTPS encryption, and take all the passwords and send it back to us. And that's when he said, I'm going to get another job. I'm not working for you guys anymore. I mean, and the point is they're not exactly as nasty as the virus writers, but they're very vigorously pushing the envelope, going as nasty as they can get, trying to get money. And when they say this stuff is legal, it kind of means they just haven't been caught yet. It kind of means they wandered into the gray zone where it's not quite bad enough for the FBI to care yet, but you know, they're doing rottener and rottener things all the time. Anyway, then you gotta have logs. Machines, if you buy servers and Windows machines and run them in their default state, they keep some logs, but those logs are only there for tech support. They're just there so that you can find out when something is broken and fix it. They're not logs that actually keep enough detail to tell if someone has hacked in or if some unauthorized people have been going to the secure folders and stuff. You have to turn on more logging. And then you have to have a central logging solution like Splunk, where all your logs go to one place and you can search through it. You disable unneeded services and block ports. This is what your firewall is for, so that if you're a file server and an email server, you need ports 25, and if you're 25 for email, and you need 80 and 443 for HTTPS, say. But if you're not doing anything else, you should just block all the others, so that if somebody starts a service on some other port or installs some malware that tries to listen on another port, it'll be blocked by the firewall, and that's where defense in depth comes in. You have several layers of defense, so even if a vulnerability occurs somewhere, another layer might stop that attack, and that's the only way to be safe. Anyway, so delete unused scripts, sample applications that come with new services have long been security problems. Very commonly, a company like Microsoft will offer like 5 new features in the latest version of IIS, and they will have some sample script to demonstrate them, and that script has a vulnerability. And everybody has that script on every server, so it's recommended to delete that stuff. There's hidden shares, and you should be trying to filter the traffic on your network with an intrusion detection system or otherwise, which is another layer of defense, which may protect vulnerable servers even if they have a vulnerability that you haven't found and fixed. Don't have accounts with blank passwords or too many administrator accounts, and so on. The most important thing is to constantly examine and update your defenses, because the attackers are smart and always changing, so you have to review your policies and make sure that your defenses are up to date. Here's a relatively recent Microsoft Security Intelligence report. For a long time now, every time you have a problem on a Windows machine, a box will pop up and say, please send this to Microsoft. And they accumulate that and build statistics. And they also, with the updates, comes this thing called the Microsoft Malicious Software Removal Tool, which is like antivirus, but it removes certain threats from your machine. Now, Microsoft does not know about that many of the threats, but if they pick like the top 10 that they think are most dangerous, and they will clean them off your machine for you, and they will return that information back to Microsoft so they know how many people are infected. So they issue these reports every 6 months telling you what people are getting infected with. The one thing that you must take with a grain of salt is they will tell you that the total number of Windows machines infected in the world is 1%. Android will tell you the same thing, because for some reason the people that make the operating systems always underestimate the infection rate. The people who make antivirus always wildly overestimate the infection rate. That's just the way it is. So anyway, they only know about 1% of the infected machines. I think there's a lot more. But they show you what they did. This time the big thing was an exploit kit called Xpurgle. This is what criminals typically do. Just like you don't write a word processor, criminals don't write a virus. They buy a kit, an exploit kit with a control panel and a product key, and they pay a license fee, and then it says, write malware with this exploit to go to these machines, send it out. Now they're under control. It opens up a panel. They have a professional tool to do this, and the current hot one is Xpurgle. It was about a year ago. So here's encounter rates. 20% of machines encountered a malicious attack, and about 1% of them actually got infected, according to Microsoft. And this is going through the various quarters of 2015. So this is only the type of malware that Microsoft knows about and is monitoring. Here's, like I say, potentially unwanted applications are much more common than malware or other kinds of unwanted software. This is the number one threat for most people, is these stupid browser hijackers and stuff that are not exactly viruses and not exactly illegal, but they're seriously a problem for people who get them. I had a friend who got a Mac. I said, oh, you don't need to worry about security on the Mac. And 2 days later, he had completely destroyed it. He got someone to set it up to watch like modern TV shows, and he got it so infected with PUPs you couldn't do anything. The browser wouldn't open and go to some stupid homepage. I had to run Malwarebytes for the Mac to clean it off. I didn't even know there was Malwarebytes for the Mac, but there is, and you need it. Anyway, here's, as you might expect, domain machines encounter less malware than non-domain machines, because your domain machines are at companies and they typically have intrusion detection systems and firewalls and such. So, like I say, a considerable amount of attacks are blocked before they ever get to the machine, which is the whole point. And here's people that are protected by security software. People who always have security software like antivirus running is now up to like 80%. And the ones who are protected have less infections. This is, there are 10 infections per 1,000, and it's supposedly 30 per 1,000 for people who don't run antivirus at all. That's why antivirus is still recommended as lowering the risk somewhat. Not to zero, but by a considerable amount. Anyway, and then there's Linux, of course. Linux, it's not like there are no vulnerabilities in Linux. As we know, there have been a few really high-profile ones coming out. But you can make it more secure. There are various versions of it. You have, the directory and file systems are all pretty good, but you have to consider your package management system and so on. You might be running mixed networks with Windows and Linux on the same network. Almost every company does. When I went to the Server 2008 launch, I think, they asked how many people out there have Linux servers on their network, and everybody's hand went up. And they said, we know everybody uses both Linux and Windows in their server farm. You need them both for different purposes. If you want them to share files, you run Samba on Linux, which is the open source imitation of the SMB protocol, which lets you share files with Windows machines. There's a CVE website, of course. This Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures list applies to Linux just like everything else, and every version of Linux has an endless chain of updates. It's a lot less important to put them on. In my experience, the Ubuntu updates, of course, maybe it's been 5 years since I used Ubuntu that much, but Ubuntu updates were really dangerous, even worse than Windows updates. They tend to break everything. I'm very careful with them. And in fact, about 5 years ago, Ubuntu, I don't even know how it exists. Ubuntu is a charity project from this one guy who made a certificate authority and sold it, Mark Shuttleworth. Then he got like $100 billion or something. So he flew a space shuttle to go out into space, and he made Ubuntu Linux to save the world. And his plan was he would start Ubuntu Linux, and then it would make money. And it would be like Red Hat and be used on servers, and that never happened. And then they had a certification program where you can get certified and get a job working on Ubuntu, but nobody ever did that. So Ubuntu is still just burning money from him, and someday he's going to get fed up with it. They tried putting ads on the desktop, and everybody screamed. They don't seem to ever have any way for it to make money. So they do strange cost-cutting measures. One of the ones they did a while ago was you could make a Ubuntu Linux club, and you could offer an update server. And you would synchronize to their server, and people would copy updates from your machine, so Ubuntu Linux doesn't have to pay for all the bandwidth for everybody from their main server. But they didn't put in any integrity checks like BitTorrent does. So people put up like FTP servers with a blank password or default password, and people poisoned the updates because they don't have integrity checks. So I think they fixed that by now, but you know, there's the thing. As you ought to expect, open source is kind of done by amateurs, and sometimes they're brilliant, and sometimes they miss the stupidest things, and then you'll find them doing unprofessional, foolish things on occasion. Anyway, so OpenVAS and any other vulnerability scanner can run an enumeration tool to find all the machines with port scanners, run zone transfers to get all the DNS names, enumerate the logon accounts and shared folders and all that jazz. And then it just goes through the CVE list, testing a long list of vulnerabilities, not everything in the CVE list, but some selection they chose. Here it is, scanning, finding NetBIOS names, finding various ports open like SSH and such. It will just scan your network and find out what's there. Then it will find a vulnerability. It found the host is installed with a Firefox Mozilla browser, and that has a buffer overflow vulnerability because it's the wrong version. So it interrogated the host and figured that out. Here's one, finding a DHCP client vulnerability. This is a pretty scary thing. You know, DHCP is what gets your IP address from a server in the first place. It has vulnerabilities like buffer overflow in DHCP. There occasionally at DEF CON, there are people who find Wi-Fi card vulnerabilities. There have been buffer overflows in processing the beacon frame, which means you turn on your Wi-Fi card and the process that puts the network in this list can be exploited. So a lot of people at DEF CON don't even turn on their wireless card, because even this process of getting that name can lead to complete overcoming the security of your machine if you have a vulnerability in the driver, and that did happen a few times. So the more paranoid people, they don't even take their computer at all or do something like that. That just depends on how bad it is if you get hacked. When I get hacked, it's worth money to me. I didn't go show that technique off. I got hacked at DEF CON. I spent the next year showing it off, so that's good. Anyway, you got a question?
Yeah, quick question. So Red Hat's pretty good about issuing updates.
Oh yeah,
But
Red Hat.
You have to be a paid subscriber too.
Well, there's two versions of Red Hat. There's the free version, Fedora, and there's the pay version. And the pay version, you get all their support. And the support is apparently quite good. And the certification program, by the way, is quite good. If you want to be a Linux system administrator, get Red Hat certified. It's very valuable to have because it's not a multiple choice test. You have to really fix a server. They stick you in a room with a server that's broken and you have 8 hours, and they come back 8 hours later, and if it isn't a web server, an email server, an FTP server, you didn't pass. That's a good test.
In terms of patches, again, how
Yeah.
these are often.
I don't have first-hand experience with Red Hat patches, but they're highly respected. I mean, businesses use Red Hat Linux in America. If you use Linux, most businesses use Red Hat. It's widely respected. Yeah, home users typically use Ubuntu, which has the latest features, but it's pretty buggy. But companies use Red Hat. So it's respected. I know that. Anyway, so you can have Trojans on your Linux server or an Linux machine, unexpected software. It can steal passwords from it like keyloggers. There are rootkits that will place it under remote control. That happens to servers pretty often. So you can check for them. There are rootkit scanners that will just look for known rootkit files. They're not terribly effective, but there's some use. What's a lot better is things like Tripwire that verify the integrity of all the files and just tell you if they have changed. Then they do not have to recognize the specific attack. They can just recognize that something changed, and if that wasn't you updating something, that was somebody else changing your system files, and that probably is up to no good. Anyway, so other countermeasures are, of course, training your users and such. There's a big argument in the security community about how much use it is to train users, but it may do some good. Anyway, inform users. Certainly you have to tell them about your company policies. You can't fire them for violating company policy if you didn't tell them what the policy was. So that's one thing. One thing is train people to watch out for social engineering. Whoever is customer facing should know never to give out any information about anybody without first verifying that they really are one of our customers and authorized to have that information. That's a good policy. Once you find vulnerabilities, you have to install your fixes promptly. This is very difficult because you have to test the fixes first, because some of those fixes break things you need, and so it's kind of a chore. And I know several years ago I heard the statement that most companies are more than 18 months behind on their patches. I think it's better now, but it is really quite a job to test and deploy those patches. Anyway, there are secure configuration things that will help. Vulnerability scanners will find known vulnerabilities, and there are some tools that will automatically see that you meet some recommended standards. And I got a few iClickers about this. And then if there's time, I want to show you one more thing outside the recording. Yeah, that'll do. All right. You should have fun how to cheat at Windows games. So, all right. So which one of these will you prevent by using SSH instead of Telnet? All right. Guess I can quit at 25. All right. Yeah, you can prevent sniffing. If people sniff your network traffic, they won't be able to get anything out of it if you're using SSH because it's encrypted. All right. Which attack hides files on the target so the bad guy can come back later and use your machine again? This is the point at which they call you owned. You're now controlled by a hostile attacker. I'll quit at 30. All right, and that's a rootkit. That's the point of them. Rootkits mean that machine is now under long-term hostile control. All right. Which attack is the most difficult to prevent? All right, I'll quit at 25. All right. And that's social engineering, always the biggest risk and hardest to fix. It's hard to patch the people. And there's a whole bunch of clever people out there that have refined, brilliant ways of tricking people into doing something stupid. Yeah.
What's your password?
There you go. But they're more careful than that, though. But yeah, the ones that stuck up behind me and recorded it with their phone while I typed in my password did get my password, and that's social engineering too. You just have to find some way in which the people are sloppy. So which one exploits a poorly written C program? 30. All right, and that's buffer overflows, almost entirely due to C and the other versions of C like C++ and such. All right. Where's a security scanner that finds problems on Windows machines? I'll quit at 25. All right, that's the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. All right. And one more of these. Which one lets Linux machines access Windows shares? All right, I'll quit at 25. All right, and so that is Samba. Okay, so let me stop this, and I'll stop the recording, and then I'll show you something that I don't want to put in the recording today, which is 123, chapter 8B. All right.